About 6 years ago, something happened to me while I was home alone that I'll never forget. Because of this, I had to get therapy for 5 months straight, and this is why I will never stay home alone again. I was 12 years old at the time of this story, and this took place in my hometown in Weymouth, Massachusetts. It's a very small town, as there was nothing to do, and the antique design of the town made it look also boring and old. One weekend, my mom had told me that she had recently gotten a call back from a job that she applied to, and that she had to go into Boston for an interview. She trusted me to watch over the house for a few hours while she was gone. With me being only 12, she went over the rules most parents tell their children when being left alone. Don't go outside, don't answer the door for anybody, etc. She then left in a hurry, and I had the house to myself for a few hours until she got back. With nothing to really do or anywhere to go, I simply threw myself onto my bed and flipped on my TV to the cartoons. About an hour later, I go downstairs while on my way to the kitchen, and I notice somebody standing in our backyard. He was facing off in the opposite direction with both of his hands in his pockets as if he were waiting for the bus. At first, I didn't get too worried as a few men had been coming by to fix a pipe on the side of the house that had a major leak. However, this guy looked nothing like a plumber or anyone who specializes in repairing pipes for that matter. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt, black pants, and a gray hoodie that surely covered most of his face. I don't even remember thinking twice about it. Anyway, I had went back upstairs and finished up my TV shows and decided to go take a shower as I had a birthday to go to later that night. I turn on the shower and go in for about 15 minutes. I take really long showers, so whenever I'm home alone, I go mental. After I was done, I turned off the water, and that's when I hear the front door open. My first thought was that it was my mom finally home from her interview, so I shoot her a text asking if she was home, and within a minute, she replies with, "Hey honey, I just got finished with the interview. I'm driving home now. Is everything okay?" That's when I get a sharp pain into the pit of my stomach, knowing that someone was in my house, and it wasn't my mom. Why my dad isn't home is another story, but I take a deep breath to compose myself and wrap a towel around me and slowly creep down the steps and try and see who it was. Looking back, that was probably the most stupidest decision of my life. As I reached the bottom step, I peeked around the corner and felt my blood run cold. There was a man, about 6'6", and looked to be in his mid-30s standing in my kitchen. He was holding a large wrench in his hand and was looking directly at me as if he knew I was coming down the stairs. Then, very quietly, he said 5 words that still haunt me till this day.
"Run while you still can."
That's when I lost it and started screaming while running up the stairs and into my room while locking the door. All the while, I began hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping at my door. I knew he was there because I could see the outlines of his shoes at the bottom of the door frame. He began banging on the door loudly with a wrench, demanding me to let him in. At this point, calling the police wasn't an option, so I did the only thing I could do. I slowly opened my window and jumped out onto the patio floor. Even though I tried to break my fall, I still landed with some minor injuries. I felt as if 1,000 pounds had been lifted off of me when I see my mom's car pull into the driveway. I run crying to her, explaining the situation, and she immediately takes out her .45 she keeps in her purse and walks into the house. I'd like to mention that my mom had served 3 years in the military, so she knew what she was doing. I heard 2 very loud gunshots from inside my room, followed by yelling and screaming. Police had been called by my neighbors, who apparently had heard the gunshots, and police then took this nightmare guy away. The look the man gave me as he was forced into the backseat of the police car was something that I'd never forget. It was a look of pure hatred and anger, like the first thing he would do once he got out of jail would be to come back for me. We had since moved out of that house a month later due to the constant paranoia I was having, which eventually made me have mental therapy as previously mentioned before. I don't know what the man's intentions were, but if he had a wrench with him, chances are he was probably planning on doing a lot more than just robbing us.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel as essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
My name is Danny, and this happened to me when I was living with my dad at the time of the story. My dad worked 2 jobs, and I was only 18 at the time and was a part-time college student, so my dad would oftentimes be called into work while I was either at home or school. This particular night, my dad had been called into work for one of his jobs for a possible storm emergency and wouldn't be back until the next day. This was during hurricane season, so him getting called into work wasn't too big of a surprise. Anyway, my dad had already left for work and I was laying on the couch watching a movie while somewhat enjoying the sound of rain and thunder from outside. At one point during the movie, I for some reason fell asleep and woke up to the sound of the home phone ringing. This wasn't too sketchy as we get calls almost every day, most of the time either from scammers or people looking for my dad through his work. I hesitated and got up to answer the phone and said hello, still in my drowsy state. However, the only thing I heard was a slight static from the other end of the line. The rest was just silence. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, I then heard what sounded like faint crying. I said hello one more time into the phone, and this time I got a response. There was a girl on the other end that sounded around 5 or 6 judging by her voice. She sounded distressed and scared. Then, clear as day, I heard these exact words. "Help me. I've been taken. I've been missing for 3 years." I told her to stay on the line with me and then I dialed 911 from my iPhone. All I told the operator was just to listen. I asked the girl where she was located, but with her being so young she could only describe the house to be small and white. She explained that she was in a dark room left alone. All of a sudden, the sound of a door opening with force broke the silence and the girl began to scream before hanging up. The operator took down every little detail she tried giving us and thanked me for informing her. All the while, I was texting my dad about the situation and he told me to stay calm and call the cops again and give our address for further explanation. The cops did end up coming to my house and I was being questioned for about half an hour before they finally left. The police never did find out who that little girl was or where she was calling from, as it would have been very difficult to trace, but they did all they could. My heart aches for that child, and I hope she's doing alright, but I still have my doubts about that.
Do you know how it's most teenagers' dream to be left home alone by their parents for an extended period of time? Well, after what happened to me the first weekend that I had been left home alone, that was something I personally dreaded. You see, I had just started my sophomore year of high school, and I had always been a responsible kid. So when my parents' anniversary came around, they asked me if they could trust me to be alone by myself for 2 nights while they went on a small trip. I loved the idea, and at the time, I couldn't get them out of the house fast enough. The following week dragged on, but soon enough it was Friday, and I knew by the time I got home from school, my parents would have been gone, and I would have the house to myself. The first thing I did when I got home was turned on the TV and grabbed my laptop to start contacting my friends. I didn't want to throw a party that weekend, but I definitely planned on having a few friends over to watch some movies and enjoy the empty house. I logged into Facebook and saw that no one was online, so I figured I would check back in an hour or so. I figured to pass the time, I would watch some South Park and scroll through Reddit. As I was sitting on the couch, the hours began to pass, and I hadn't heard from any of my friends. I figured they were just busy though, and I would hear from them later. I began to make dinner for myself. I was just going to make some pasta and sauce, but before I could even turn the burner for the stove on, I heard a knock at my door. I paused for a moment and was curious as to who might be knocking when I heard it again. Only this time the knocking was a lot louder, and I figured it was just one of my friends that probably decided to just stop by unannounced. I yelled out for whoever was knocking to hang on and told them that I would get to the door in a second. I made my way out of the kitchen and down the small hallway that led to the front door. The person on the other side was still pounding on it. I yelled louder for them to stop and told them that I was coming to answer the door. Before opening it, I decided to look through the peephole just to make sure it was actually one of my friends on the other side. But when I got a good look, I tossed myself away from the door. Standing on my front porch was a full-grown man who appeared to be covering his face with a ski mask or hat of sorts. Before I could react any further, I heard a smashing sound from the other side of my house. Someone had broken through the sliding door in the kitchen. I tried to run through the hallway and get into my room so I could hide away, but before I could make it 10 feet, the person who had broken through the kitchen door already had their hands on me. I was thrown into the wall and then onto the ground. The intruder bound my arms behind my back and tied them together with rope they had brought with them. And after opening the front door for his accomplice, the two walked over to my basement stairs and tossed me down. I hardly felt it, as my head bounced off multiple stairs on my way down. As I was laying on the cold concrete floor, I could hear the sound of men rummaging through my house above me. They were only inside for what seemed like 15 or 20 minutes before I heard them both running out of the front door. I tried my best to get up, but any time I got close, I would get dizzy and drop back to the floor. I ended up being trapped on my basement floor for the entire night before I was finally found. My parents called the police after I didn't contact them the night before or that morning and asked them to stop by and check on me. After my parents found out what happened, they rushed back from their trip and met me at the hospital. I was fine aside from a mild concussion, but the thieves ended up getting away with more than $6,000 worth of jewelry and electronics from my parents' room. As far as we know, the intruders were never found. The summer after I graduated from high school, my parents had planned a trip for them to visit my aunt. During that time, they had agreed to let me stay home and have a small party with just a few of my friends to celebrate a successful school year. The party went off without a hitch. There was no funny business, and when it was time to clear out and go home, everyone listened to me when I told them to leave. All in all, I thought the night was a success. That was until I went up to my room for some sleep. I was pretty tired, so after cleaning up a bit, I decided to leave the rest for the morning, and I would handle it all after waking up. I made sure to lock all the doors, and I went upstairs to go to sleep. I knew I was tired because I was asleep within 2 minutes after my head touched the pillow. It was like turning off a light. Sadly, as quickly as I fell asleep, I was woken up. My eyes shot open as I heard the sound of something slamming downstairs. I knew something had fallen, but I couldn't think of what it could have been. I mean, I was home alone, so I didn't know what could have fallen on its own. And that was when I realized it. Someone else must have been in the house with me. I did my best to stay silent and listen as closely as I could. And sure enough, I could hear the sound of one or more people walking around downstairs. I assumed it was just some kids from the party who hadn't heard me tell everyone to go home, so I figured I would just call out to them. I got out of bed and walked over to my door. I cracked it open and yelled, "Hey, the party's over. Everyone went home." Suddenly, there was silence. I could tell that something wasn't right. Out of nowhere, I could hear the slamming of footsteps as whoever it was began running through my house and towards the staircase. I didn't even think. I closed my door and ran straight for the window above my bed. I had used the window to sneak out of my house before, so I knew how to get in and out of it quickly. I slid right through it and onto the roof of my house. As I turned back, I could see my door handle moving as if someone was struggling to open it. I turned and began to make my way down the side of my house and ran across my yard into my neighbors. After pounding on the door for a minute, they came running out. I informed them about the intruders in my house, and they told me to come inside and they would call the cops. While we waited for them to arrive, we were shocked to see 3 different people fleeing from my house. None of them appeared to be carrying any stolen property, which either means they didn't find anything worth taking or that they were there for a more violent reason. Since the incident, my parents have installed security cameras along with an alarm system. Luckily, we have never had a similar situation occur. Growing up, I had to get used to my dad pranking me, which is why when he called me to tell me not to answer the front door as I was watching TV, I thought he was just messing with me. My phone rang, and that was the first thing he said, "Don't answer the door." I froze for a moment, but then began to laugh because I assumed he was just trying to freak me out. But when the doorbell rang, things got increasingly more serious. My dad must have heard the bell on the other side because he very firmly said, "Don't go to the door." I asked him what was going on because I could tell how serious he was being, and he told me that he wasn't sure, but the police were on their way. At that point, I was both shaking with fear, but very curious as to what was going on. The doorbell rang again, and I figured I could peek out the window and see who was there. I leaned over my couch and slowly moved the curtain out of the way, and my dad must have heard me gasp because all he said was, "Hey, you're gonna be okay. The police will be there soon. Just don't answer the door." And I wish that made me feel better. But outside my house, there were at least 3 men, all dressed up in clown clothing and carrying what looked like weapons. I could see 2 of them standing on my porch, while another was walking around my yard. I told my dad that I was scared, and that was when the ringing of the doorbell turned to slamming on the door. I couldn't tell if they were knocking really hard or trying to kick it down. I began to panic, and as I turned away from the window that was facing the front of my house, I screamed. Standing on the other side of my house, with his face pressed against the window, was the 3rd clown. He waved his hand slowly as we made eye contact. The slamming at the front door grew louder and louder, and my dad tried to calm me down, though he knew there was little to be done until the police arrived. Thankfully, I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance. Sadly, so did the men trying to break in. The 3 of them quickly ran off my property and down the road away from the sirens. Once the police arrived, I unlocked the door and let them in. We explained everything to them, and they let us know that we weren't the only call that they had gotten like this in the past few months. Apparently, these 3 had been terrorizing people in the surrounding area for a few months before I had a run-in with them.
This happened to me when I was in my early years as a teenager. I was 14 years old, and I was staying at my grandma's house for the weekend as she had lived far from us at the time and we didn't see her often. She lived way out into the country, and for some reason she didn't drive even though it seemed convenient for her, especially living isolated. One day, my grandma told me that she was going to her local grocery store to pick up a few things and asked if I wanted to come. The grocery store was about a 6-mile long walk from my grandma's house. And with me being a lazy and boring kid, I refused and figured I'd just watch some shows on TV. My grandma was 84 at the time, and surprisingly, as old as she was, she still had a lot of strength in her, which is why she took long walks. Fast forward a few hours later, it was now past 6 and the sun was starting to set. I was on the TV watching a SpongeBob episode, when I hear what sounded like faint laughing coming from outside. I lowered the TV to see if I could hear it again, and when I did, I could confirm that there was indeed somebody out there. However, there was something very off-putting about the laughing, It was hard to describe, but I remember it sounding like a little girl's laugh with no language skills. It was freaky as hell, and I got up to look through the windows to see if anyone was out there. But to my surprise, there didn't seem to be anyone. My instincts told me to call out to whoever was there, or at least open the door, but I was naturally afraid at this point. 5 minutes go by, and I didn't hear the laughing again, so I quietly opened the door to see if anyone was there. Nothing. The very second I took one step outside, I hear the laughing almost instantly coming from a big tree, much more louder than before. I didn't even dream of looking behind that tree to see who was there. All I did was go back inside and lock all of the doors and continued watching my show. I have yet to hear that laugh since, and I haven't told anyone else about this. Till this day, I still wonder what would have happened had I walked over to that tree to see who or what was there. When I was 15, I moved in with my aunt and uncle as my parents had recently gotten separated due to reasons I won't go into. Therefore, my aunt and uncle took me in to go live with them. Both my aunt and uncle worked in the medical field at the time, and their shifts would often change from time to time, meaning I would be home alone for some time. My uncle never got me a babysitter, as he didn't baby people and figured as long as he trusted me that it would be fine to let me stay alone. One evening, both my aunt and uncle were doing their nightly routine of working while I was at home watching a movie trying to take a nap on the couch. For some reason, I always had a hard time falling asleep on nights like this, so I probably laid there for about a good half hour or so when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to my left and saw a man looking through our window. Our living room window is massive, you might as well consider it as a glass wall. Now, we have an alarm system, but the only time the alarm goes off is if the glass breaks, and I couldn't move to call the police as our home phone was located in the kitchen and I didn't want to be spotted by him. Of course, I immediately freeze and try not to be noticed, but it seemed as if he didn't know I was there. He was not a pleasant looking man. I saw craze in his eyes, indicating that he was on something. But I still laid there watching him. He wore a black jacket and some torn jeans, and his hair was a mess. As nice as our neighborhood was, we had a few homeless people roaming the area. Eventually, after taking several looks inside, he walked off into the trees, and that's when I noticed sticking out of his right pocket was a handgun. I ran upstairs into my room and stayed up there for the remainder of the night. I told my uncle about this, and I remember him going out the following week to install a camera system. A little bit of context as to what made this story absolutely terrifying. When I was around 15, my family and I moved into a big 2-storied house that was built back in the 80s. Even though the house was fairly odd, it was still a decent-sized house appropriate for a family of 4. The only problem I had about it was the blatantly obvious antique design of the house. It was nice, but the design gave off such an eerie vibe to us kids, and we didn't exactly know as to why. Anyway, one night, my parents had gone out to dinner for their 10th anniversary, and I was home watching over my little brother Kevin, who was only 2 at the time. During this time, we were still in the process of unpacking our things into our new rooms, so we slept down in the den for the time being. I slept on a cot, while Kevin slept in his crib. I'd say that we were both fast asleep by 10, when I woke up to Kevin crying his eyes out. Normally when he cried, he most likely wanted a snack or something, but that immediately checked out when I saw him pointing at the open door that led into the pitch-black basement. I'd say right then and there, I started feeling extremely cold, which didn't make sense as this was during the summer and our AC was broken. I had this negative energy around me, like a sense of dread. Then, clear as day, I heard the sound of a child laughing. I grabbed Kevin and brought him upstairs with me, and we slept in the living room couch for the remainder of the night. Till this day, I truly believe that what we experienced that night was completely paranormal. I never found anything in that basement the next day.
I'm 27 years old now. This happened when I was 13, my sister was 9, and my brother was 6. We were raised by our single mother. She usually worked nights on the weekends. I was old enough to be home alone, so whenever my mom was at work, I was the one responsible for my siblings. This all happened on a Saturday night. For a little bit of context, let me give you the layout of my childhood home. When you walked into the living room, there was a hallway. To the right was the kitchen. Then straight ahead was the downstairs bathroom. To the left was the stairway. Once you got upstairs, the first room straight ahead was the upstairs bathroom. The first room on the right was my room, and the second room on the right was my brother's. The room across from mine was my mom's, and my sister's room was right next to my mom's. Now here's the story. Before my mom left for work, she had gave me $20 for pizza, then left. I ordered the pizza and we had a good night. About 2 hours after we ate, my sister went to the downstairs bathroom. When she came out of the bathroom though, she said that she heard someone knock on the window. I believed her and I told her that it was okay. Well, about an hour later, we heard yet another knock at the front door. I looked in the peephole and I saw a dirty-looking man with long brown scraggly hair. He looked like he was homeless, but I couldn't really tell. I then began to look down and I saw that he had a knife right in his hand. I then looked at my brother and I told him to turn off the TV and all of the lamps. I told my sister to grab my flip phone while I ran in the kitchen to grab a knife. I then told all of my siblings to go upstairs. I told my brother to go hide under his bed and my sister to go hide in my mom's closet. I then hid in the upstairs bathtub. I then heard the front door smash open. It was a really flimsy old door, so it didn't really surprise me that that happened. I then heard doors opening downstairs. I started to dial 911. I heard the man start to come upstairs and then heard the bathroom door open. I held one hand over my mouth while the other was holding my flip phone. Very luckily, he didn't open the shower curtain. When the man left, I had started to worry about my siblings. I then got out of the bathtub and ran out of the bathroom. I began to run full force at the guy, stabbing him a few times. Right as this was happening, the police had finally arrived. I saw him trying to run out the front door, but the police were able to catch him. I then found my siblings, and the police called our mom. My mom came home immediately. She even quit that job because of this. So yeah, that's definitely the scariest thing that's ever happened to me while home alone, but hopefully the last. I'm currently a 15-year-old female, but I was around 11 at the time of this event. It was mid-December in West Virginia, and there was a thin layer of snow on the ground, and I was home alone while my entire household was at the local Walmart. I didn't go because I had a terrible fever, but regardless of the fever, I typically stayed home anyway. I've always had some sort of social anxiety, and I've never really liked being in a crowd of people, with the fear that I'd be judged. Now starting the story, it had been about 15 minutes after my family left, and I was sitting on my bed with my protective pit bull. Keep that in mind because it's a really important part of the story. I was watching some show on my laptop when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a human shape, then very quickly pass my window. I tried to brush it off while attempting to rationalize the incident, but I had a gut feeling that something was wrong. Disregarding my gut feeling, I directed my attention back to my show, when about 5 minutes later, my dog jumped off my bed and then started growling while looking at my window. I didn't really think too much of it at first, knowing that she often growled at deer when they passed my window. But then I thought about what I saw before, and then pretty much instantly I felt my stomach go numb. I slowly walked up to my window to see if anything was there, and at first glance I didn't see anything. Then my heart sank. I then looked across the snow and saw boot prints. Boot prints leading to my window. I was terrified at this point, scared to look down. But still, I slowly let my eyes venture downward, and to my horror, right below the window pressed up against my house, I saw a man. He was about 6 foot from what I could tell, with dark brown hair, a beard, and dark green eyes, and he was wearing a snowsuit. He then looked up at me, and the both of us were frozen in fear. We made eye contact for about 10 seconds, but that 10 seconds felt like forever. As soon as I snapped into realization, I grabbed my phone and ran as fast as I could up the stairs and then into my bathroom. I could still hear my dog growling and loudly barking, but I didn't care. I decided to call my mom. Stupid, I know. I should have called the police instead, but I was just so scared, and the only thing making me feel safe was the sound of her voice. As soon as she picked up the phone, she heard how stressed I was and just how frightened my voice sounded. I explained the situation, and she told me she was sending the police and that she would be heading home ASAP. Well, everything was starting to smooth out. Although I was still shook, I was feeling more comfort now. But then everything came crashing down when I then heard glass begin to shatter. I thought I was going to pass out. I was shaking so violently, and I couldn't think straight. The next sound that followed up was a screaming. Just very loud, blood-curdling screams. And that's when I realized it. My dog was attacking him. I was still so scared shitless, but felt a sense of happiness. Soon I heard my door being broken down, while my mom and the police officers came into the house. My mom came up to the bathroom, and I led her inside. I think I can honestly say that was the most safe I'd ever felt in my mother's arms. She walked me downstairs, and I could see the guy being taken out in handcuffs, crying and covered in blood. My dog then came barreling into me, licking my face and jumping all over me. I could tell right away that she knew she had done right. I still have the same dog. Her name is Metallic, and she's 8 years old. She still acts like a puppy, though. I will forever love that dog, and she's probably the reason I'm here today.